Imagine that to defeat a monster, you had to become one yourself. In this video, we will reveal the anatomy of the most brutal confrontation in history, where nobility was forgotten for the sake of survival. You will learn how one genius turned 80,000 soldiers into a bloody pulp in a single day, and how Great Rome, in a panic, stooped to human sacrifice right in the center of the city, burying people alive. We will tell you facts that make blood run cold, facts often omitted from textbooks, about a Roman hero who, for the sake of victory, burned 40,000 sleeping men alive, about a horrific package containing a severed brother's head thrown at a commander's feet, and about a sack filled to the brim with the gold rings of dead senators, the sound of which made an entire continent shudder. This is not a tale of knightly valor. This is a chronicle of how honor was exchanged for efficiency, and mercy became a cynical weapon. Watch the video to the end to learn the bitterest irony of fate. Why the two greatest minds of their era, the winner and the loser, ended up rejected by their own people and died in exile. Welcome to the true hell of the Second Punic War. Imagine that the air is gone. It has been displaced by dust. Red, thick dust, impregnated with iron, clogging your nostrils, throat, and lungs. You are standing in the center of a crowd of 80,000 people, yet you feel like the loneliest creature in the universe. To your left, a comrade's shoulder presses into your ribs with enough force to break bones. To your right, someone's shield flattens your ear. You cannot raise your arm. You cannot draw your sword. You cannot even fall when you die. The corpses stand upright, clamped in the vice of the living, staring at you with glassy eyes. This is not hell. This is the result of a genius at work. Welcome to the largest mass grave of antiquity. You are on the plains of Apulia. The sun stands at its zenith on August 2nd, 216 BC. The Volturnus wind blows straight into your face, carrying sand and the screams of the dying. Right now, in this very second, the hope of Western civilization is being destroyed here. This is Cannae, the point where the Roman war machine, that relentless steamroller supposed to crush any enemy, suddenly hit a wall. And the wall proved stronger. Look at this field from above. Not as a historian sitting in a comfortable armchair, but as a vulture awaiting a feast. You will see the perfect geometry of death. The Romans, confident in their invincibility, formed up in a deep column. Their plan was primitive, like a sledgehammer blow, to smash the enemy center with sheer mass. 80,000 legionaries against 50,000 mercenaries. The math was on Rome's side. But war is not mathematics. It is psychology. The Carthaginian commander, Hannibal Barca, knew this. He arranged his troops in a crescent, the convex side facing the Romans. It was an invitation. And the Roman consuls, blinded by their own pride, accepted it. They struck the center. The crescent began to buckle. The Romans rejoiced. "We are crushing them! They are running!" shouted the centurions, driving their men deeper into the bag. They did not realize this retreat was controlled. Hannibal was not fleeing. He was tightening the noose. When the flanks of the Carthaginian cavalry closed behind the legionaries' backs, the trap snapped shut. 80,000 men found themselves in a cauldron the size of a couple of stadiums. It wasn't a battle. It was a mechanized slaughter. Do you know what the scariest thing about Cannae was? Not the clang of swords, the tightness. Men went mad from claustrophobia before the tip of a spear even touched them. In the center of the encirclement, soldiers waited hours for their turn to die. They heard the outer circle of legionaries being ground down against the African infantry, like a log against a grindstone. With every hour, the circle tightened. Death stepped closer. step by step, strike by strike. Roman historians would later write of heroism. Do not believe them. There was no room for heroism there. There was only animal terror and the physics of bodies. To kill 70,000 people with cold steel in one day, you have to maintain an assembly line pace. That is hundreds of murders per minute. By evening, the African mercenaries were collapsing from fatigue, their hands cramping around their sword hilts. But they kept chopping. Because before them were not people. Before them was cattle driven to the slaughter. The earth no longer absorbed the moisture. By sunset, the field ceased to be earth and became flesh mixed with mud. Among this bloody mass, where consuls and senators perished, where the flower of the Roman aristocracy turned into nameless mints, was one young man. He is only 19 years old. His name is Publius Cornelius Scipio. Remember that name. Right now, he is nobody, just a frightened kid, a tribune of the Second Legion who miraculously escaped the encirclement. He sees his world collapsing. He sees the invincible legions turning into a pile of screaming meat. But look into his eyes. There are no tears in them. Frozen in them is a cold, analytical shock. While others pray to the gods or curse their fate, this young man does something that will change history. He is learning. In this hell, amidst the stench and the screams, Scipio receives the cruelest lesson of his life. He looks at Hannibal's tactics and understands a terrible truth. Honor does not matter. Traditions do not matter. The winner is not the one with more strength, but the one who knows how to control chaos. Roman valor proved useless against the intellect of a monster. Hannibal did not just win, he humiliated Rome. He showed that a legionary is just a resource that can be spent in a couple of hours if you know the right algorithm. Could you keep your sanity seeing that? Knowing that over the hill stands an army that never loses. Scipio could. He memorized every mistake of his commanders. He memorized how the barbarians on the flanks destroyed the Roman cavalry. He absorbed this nightmare so that years later he could return it to the enemy with interest. Meanwhile, news of the catastrophe reached Rome. The eternal city froze. Imagine a silence heavier than a granite slab. There is mourning in every family. There is not a single house that has not lost a father, son, or brother. 70,000 dead. It is not just a number. It is a demographic pit that will haunt them for generations. The Senate is paralyzed. Crazed women run through the streets shouting the names of the dead. The city gates are open, but there is no one to defend them. The phrase, "Hannibal at the gates," ceased to be a scary story for children. It became reality. The Romans expected the banners of Carthage to appear on the horizon the next day, and for the city to vanish in fire. Priests buried Greek and Gallic slaves alive in the Forum Boarium, trying to buy the gods' mercy with human sacrifice. Great Rome, proud Rome, descended to primeval barbarism out of fear. They were ready for anything. But Hannibal did not come. Why? It is a riddle that will torment historians for thousands of years. But while Rome trembled in the agony of waiting, something more cynical than the battle itself was happening on the field at Cannae. Looters. Carthaginian soldiers walked over mountains of corpses, looking for the glint of gold in puddles of thick, black blood. They weren't just looking for coins, they were looking for status symbols. From the stiffened fingers of dead Roman knights and senators, they tore off gold rings. Each such ring was the life of an aristocrat. It was a lineage they had taken pride in for centuries. It was power. Now these rings were just metal, loot, currency. They tore them off with the flesh, threw them into sacks, weighed them in their hands. 1 ring, a second, 100th, 1,000th. The ringing of gold drowned out the groans of the wounded being finished off with spear thrusts. The victors were gathering a harvest of death, and that harvest was rich. A huge, heavy sack, filled to the top with the gold rings of the Roman elite, was tied with a rough rope. This sack would travel across the sea to become the most terrifying proof of Rome's fall. The marble floor of the Council of Elders in Carthage shuddered, not from an earthquake, but from a sound. It was the ring of metal on stone. Thousands of gold rings, poured out of that very sack, hit the slabs, rolling to the feet of the richest men in Africa. A golden rain. But this was not wealth. These were lives stripped from fingers. Every ring was a killed Roman senator or knight. Hannibal did not send a report. He sent his political enemies physical proof of the apocalypse. The ringing mountain of gold in the middle of the hall screamed louder than any words. "The Roman army is no more. I destroyed them all. Now it is your turn to give me reinforcements, so I can finish the beast in its lair." The elders looked at this mountain in stupor. They were used to counting profits from the trade in purple dye and grain, but this man traded in death on an industrial scale. Who is he? Where did this force of nature come from, sweeping away legions like bowling pins? To understand the horror that gripped Italy, we must rewind time to the day when a 9-year-old boy stood before a sacrificial altar. Imagine the scene. Smoke, the smell of burning incense and meat, the reflection of fire on the stern face of his father, Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar had lost the First Punic War, but he had not accepted defeat. He raised his son not as a child, but as an instrument of vengeance. He brought little Hannibal to the fire and made him swear an oath, not just a promise, but a curse etched into his skin. "I swear that I will never be a friend to Rome." At that moment, childhood ended. The perfect predator was born. Hannibal did not just hate Rome, he lived for its destruction. His entire life was preparation for one strike to the heart. And this strike was unthinkable. Military science of that time stated, Italy can only be attacked from the sea. The Alps were considered a wall erected by the gods themselves, an impassable barrier of ice and rock. To attempt to lead an army across them in autumn, when the passes are buried in snow, is not strategy. It is suicide. It is madness. That is exactly why Hannibal chose this path. Have you ever tried walking on ice in sandals? Now imagine dragging 37 war elephants with you. 37 living tanks that had never seen snow, slipping, trumpeting in terror, and falling into abysses, dragging drivers and wagons with them. Hannibal lost half his army there. Tens of thousands of men remained lying in the glaciers, frozen to death or smashed against the rocks. Any other general would have turned back, but Hannibal drove them forward like a man possessed. He used his losses as fuel. He blasted rocks by heating them with bonfires and dousing them with vinegar to cut a path. When the exhausted, ragged soldiers, looking like ghosts, descended into Italy, the Romans did not believe their eyes. It was as if an invasion force had fallen from the moon. Hannibal broke the laws of physics and logistics. He came from where it was impossible to come. And from that moment, fear became his main ally. In Rome, they stopped considering him a man. Can a man see through mountains? Can a man command the fog? At Lake Trasimene, Hannibal used the morning mist to hide an entire army. The Roman consul, a self-assured fool, marched into the defile thinking he was pursuing fugitives. And then the fog lifted, and the Romans saw they were in a trap. The water of the lake turned red in an hour. Hannibal didn't just win battles, he directed them like a cruel play. He read Roman generals like open scrolls. He knew their characters better than their own wives did. He would yield to the hot-tempered one to lure him into a trap. He would taunt the cautious one, burning villages before his eyes until he lost his composure. He used nature as a weapon. At the Trebia, he forced the Romans to cross an icy river chest-deep in water on empty stomachs, early in the morning. When the frozen legionaries climbed onto the bank, they were met by well-fed Carthaginians, warmed by fires and rubbed with oil. It was like taking candy from a baby. At Cannae, he positioned his troops so the wind drove dust straight into the Romans' eyes, blinding them. He fought not only with the sword, he fought with the wind, the sun, the cold, and the terrain. At some point, Hannibal himself began to resemble a mythical monster. During the crossing of the Etruscan marshes, he caught an eye infection. There were no doctors, no time to stop. He rode on the last surviving elephant, suffering hellish pain until the eye leaked out. The one-eyed demon. That is what they whispered in Italian villages now. His appearance inspired mystical terror. He was everywhere and nowhere. He would appear out of nowhere, destroy a consular army, and dissolve into the hills. The Roman system, built on discipline and order, collided with chaos, possessing the intellect of a genius. They changed consuls, changed tactics, raised new legions, but the result was the same: mountains of corpses and the triumph of the one-eyed one. The Romans felt like children trying to fight a professional heavyweight boxer. Every blow they threw fell into the void, and in return came a crushing hook that broke their jaw. It was a psychological catastrophe. Rome's allies began to waver. Cities in southern Italy opened their gates to Hannibal simply to avoid being burned. It seemed history itself had decided to put an end to the Roman experiment. The Republic was teetering. The old gods were silent. New sacrifices did not help. The heavy, sticky smell of an inevitable end hung in the air. It seemed there was no way out, that this Carthaginian hammer would strike until nothing remained of the eternal city but dust and memories. But precisely in this moment of absolute darkness, when even the staunchest began packing their bags to flee doomed Italy, in the small town of Canusium, where the pitiful remnants of the survivors of Cannae had gathered, the air trembled from a furious scream. Someone decided he had had enough. Someone who was too young to know that resistance was futile. And while the old world collapsed, in a stuffy tent, amidst the groans of the wounded, a sword was already being raised to cut the throat of defeatism. The air in the tent was stale, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, sour wine, and animal fear. Here, in the camp at Canusium, the golden youth of Rome had gathered. The sons of consuls, patricians, future senators. Those who by right of birth should have led legions into battle, now huddled together like frightened sheep. Lucius Caecilius Metellus, a young aristocrat with trembling lips, spoke loudest of all. His plan was simple and shameful. Italy is doomed. Hannibal is the wrath of the gods, and one does not fight gods. We must flee. Take ships, sail to the kings of the East, ask for asylum in Egypt or Greece. Let us leave this cursed city to the barbarians. The others nodded. In their eyes, there was no Rome. In their eyes were only sails and the saving sea. They had already mentally betrayed their fathers, their altars, and their people. They had survived the meat grinder of Cannae, only to become deserters. And then the tent flap flew open. It wasn't a man who burst inside. It was fury itself. Publius Cornelius Scipio, his face smeared with mud and foreign blood, held a naked gladius in his hand. The steel glinted predatorily in the gloom. He did not plead. He did not make patriotic speeches about duty. He simply pressed the tip of his sword to the ringleader's throat. The metal rested against Metellus's Adam's apple, and a deathly silence hung in the tent. "I swear." Scipio's voice was quiet, but all the more terrifying for it. "I swear by great Jupiter that I will not abandon the Republic myself, nor will I allow anyone else to do so." He swept a mad gaze over those present. It was the gaze of a fanatic, the gaze of a man who had already died there on the battlefield and resurrected with a single purpose. "And you," he hissed, "will swear to the same thing right now, or I will sacrifice you to the gods of the underworld right here." One by one, stammering with horror, yesterday's masters of life, broken by the will of a 19-year-old youth, repeated the words of the oath. They feared Hannibal, but they feared this rabid boy with the sword more. That stuffy evening in Canusium, Scipio performed his first real feat. He did not win a battle. He crushed the will of the Roman elite, forcing them to be brave against their will. He understood that sometimes, to save the state, you must put a knife to its throat. While young Scipio cemented the army's spirit with fear and charisma, in Rome itself, the old wolves of the Senate were deciding how to save the body of the Republic. Hannibal was still in Italy. He roamed it like a master, burning crops and seizing cities. The Romans thirsted for revenge. The crowd demanded battle. "Give us legions, and we will crush him!" they shouted in the forum. But Rome was led by a man who had the courage to do the hardest thing: nothing. Quintus Fabius Maximus. Remember this name. He was appointed dictator, a man with absolute power. They expected a miracle from him. They expected a new strike. But he ordered swords to be put back in scabbards. His strategy was brilliant in its cruelty and boredom. It was named the Scorched Earth strategy. Fabius understood. In open battle, Hannibal is the god of war. Trying to outplay him in tactics is like playing cards with a shark who marks the deck. So, you must flip the table. Fabius began to follow the Carthaginian army like a shadow. He walked along the high ground, never descending to the plains where Hannibal's cavalry was deadly. He attacked only small detachments of foragers who had strayed from the herd. He became a tick that burrowed into the lion's hide and slowly drank its blood. Imagine what this was like for a proud Roman. You stand on the fortress wall and see your villa burning. You see your olive groves, planted by your grandfather, being chopped down. You hear the cattle being driven away. Your hand reaches for your sword. You want to run out and fight, to die, but to protect what is yours. And Fabius says, no. Watch. Endure. Let it burn. It was torture by inaction. Rome hated him. They nicknamed him Cunctator, the delayer. People spat at him in the streets. Soldiers composed offensive verses about him, calling him Hannibal's pedagogue, who obediently follows his pupil. Friends turned away from him. Who is this old man? A coward? A traitor? But Fabius was made of flint. He swallowed these insults like bitter medicine because he knew time works for Rome. Hannibal was in a foreign land. He did not have infinite resources. Every killed soldier, every broken wagon, every eaten sack of grain brought his end closer. Fabius was not trying to defeat Hannibal. He was trying to exhaust him, deprive him of sleep, starve him. It was a war of attrition, where the main weapons became logistics and patience. Cruel, unheroic, dirty work. Hannibal was furious. He tried to provoke Fabius. He burned everything around the dictator's estate, but did not touch the estate itself to sow rumors of Fabius's treachery. Hannibal knew that if Rome continued to avoid battle, Carthage would lose. He needed a victory, loud and bloody, to lure the Italian allies to his side. But Rome turned into a turtle that pulled its head into its shell and waited for the predator to break its teeth on it. Years passed. Years of humiliation and fear. Rome learned to survive in hell. The city turned into a military camp. Women were forbidden to publicly mourn the dead so as not to undermine morale. A limit on luxury was introduced. All gold was handed over to the treasury. Even slaves were bought by the state and armed, an unheard of thing for a slave-owning society. The Republic compressed into a spring, ready to recoil. But while this sticky chess match of two old men was going on in Italy, on the other end of the Mediterranean, in sunny Spain, a tragedy was unfolding that would strike Scipio personally. His father Publius and uncle Gnaeus, two pillars of the Scipio family, were fighting their war there. They were the ones keeping Carthaginian reinforcements from marching to Italy. They were heroes. They were hope. And then, a few years after Cannae, the wind brought news across the sea that made the blood run cold even in the most hardened veterans. Letters sealed with black wax. There were no words of victory in them. There was only death. 2 armies destroyed, 2 commanders killed within a month of each other. Spain is lost. The enemy rejoices. The Scipios are no longer the defenders of Rome. They are dead men. And this news flew to Rome like a spear aimed straight at the heart of young Publius, who did not yet know that fate had just cleared a place for him on the stage of history at the most terrible price. When the news of the Scipio's death reached the Forum, it did not cause panic. Panic is the lot of those who still have hope. This news brought with it an icy, deathly silence. The Romans were silent because words had run out. 2 brothers, Publius and Gnaeus, had held the defense in Spain for 2 years like titans, preventing the Carthaginian tsunami from spilling over the Pyrenees and the Alps. And now they are gone. Both died 30 days apart, their armies scattered, destroyed, sold into slavery. Imagine the map of that time. Italy is already burning under Hannibal's feet. And now Spain, the richest province, the forge of silver and mercenaries, is completely under Carthage's control. 3 huge armies stand there under the command of the enemy's best generals, Hasdrubal Barca, Mago, and Hasdrubal Gisco. 3 heads of the Hydra, now looking toward Rome. The barrier is broken. Nothing stops them from uniting with Hannibal and staging a final, exemplary execution for the Eternal City. In this atmosphere of absolute collapse, elections for a commander are announced in Rome. Usually the Campus Martius is a vanity fair. Senators push with their elbows, bribe voters, tear at each other's throats for the right to receive a province and legions. Power is a drug Romans do not refuse. But not in the year 211. That day, a huge crowd of citizens gathered on the Campus Martius. They waited for heroes. They waited for an experienced consul, a veteran with scars, to step out, beat his chest, and say, "I will save you!" The magistrate shouted the invitation to candidates, and in response, he heard only the sound of the wind and the shuffle of sandals. No one stepped forward. Look at the faces of these fathers of the fatherland. Experienced generals, the richest men of the Republic, hid their eyes. They looked at the ground, at their togas, anywhere but the rostrum, because everyone understood. Command in Spain is not an honorary position. It is a death sentence. It is a one-way ticket to the cemetery, where 2 Scipios already lie. No one wanted to be the third. Cowardice that day was almost physically palpable. It smelled of sweat and shame. Great Rome, conqueror of nations, turned out to be castrated by fear. And when the silence became unbearable, when it seemed the elections would fail due to a lack of volunteers to die, the crowd suddenly stirred. People parted, letting someone through to the platform. It was not a gray-haired strategist, not a portly politician. A young man ascended the platform. Publius Cornelius Scipio. He is 24 years old. By Roman law, he did not even have the right to run. He was a boy. To receive imperium, supreme military power, one had to climb the ladder of offices and be no younger than 40-something. But he stood there in his bright toga, looking down at the crowd. He was handsome, with that antique beauty sculptors try to capture in marble. Long hair, burning eyes, a confident pose. But people saw not a hero in him. They saw a ghost. He looked frighteningly like his dead father and uncle. Scipio began to speak. His speech was not a plea for votes. It was a fatalist's manifesto. He did not promise an easy victory. He spoke of revenge. He said he accepted command as his bloody inheritance. No one dared to take this sword, so I will take it, his eyes seemed to say. He spoke with such passion and confidence that the crowd, depressed just a minute ago, exploded. They voted for him unanimously. All centuries, all classes. But do not be deceived. This was not a choice of reason. It was a hysterical impulse. People voted for him not because they believed in his genius, but because they were ashamed of themselves. And also, because it was easier to pity this beautiful boy than to send one of the respected elders to the slaughter. Rome sacrificed Scipio like a lamb, hoping the gods would be sated with his blood. The skeptic senators, old foxes like Fabius Maximus, watched this with grim irony. "We are sending a child against veterans who destroyed his father," they whispered in the corridors. "He will not return. Spain will become the grave for the entire Scipio line." But Scipio no longer heard their whispers. Having received the power given to him out of desperation, he did not waste time on banquets. He gathered the remnants of the legions, recruited volunteers, and boarded ships. He was leaving Italy, where Hannibal was still invincible, to head into the lion's mouth. When his fleet disappeared over the horizon, many in Rome breathed a sigh of relief. One less problem. The mad boy would die, and they could return to the strategy of survival. None of them guessed that this boy carried with him not just swords and shields. He carried a plan so bold that the experienced strategists of Carthage did not even consider it a possibility. Scipio did not intend to fight by the rules. While his enemies thought he would strengthen defenses in northern Spain, he was looking at a completely different point on the map. He was looking at New Carthage. It was the capital of the enemy empire in Spain, a fortress city, a treasure city, standing on a peninsula surrounded by water, an impregnable citadel. Taking it was impossible. Any siege would last for months, and during that time, 3 Carthaginian armies would arrive and crush the Romans against the walls. That is exactly why no one guarded New Carthage seriously. Why guard what cannot be taken? But Scipio knew a secret he learned not from spies, but from simple fishermen in Tarraco. He learned that the sea, breathes. And he intended to use this breath to do the impossible. A few weeks after landing, he gathered his officers and gave an order that sounded like madness. "We are not going to look for the enemy army. We are going to take their heart. We are marching on New Carthage, and we will do it in 7 days." The soldiers exchanged glances. 7 days of forced march through enemy territory to bang their heads against the highest walls in Spain. It is suicide. But the same fire burned in Scipio's eyes as on the Campus Martius. He told them that Neptune himself appeared to him in a dream and promised help. And the soldiers believed. Not the strategist, but the prophet. The legions moved south, leaving clouds of dust behind, meeting their glory or their doom. And time began the countdown to one of the most daring assaults in military history. 25,000 pairs of feet pounded the dust into the Spanish earth in a rhythm that seemed impossible. The Roman army, that clumsy turtle, suddenly turned into a cheetah. Scipio drove his men to the limit of human endurance. 7 days of forced march. No stops just to lie down. They ate on the move, slept in snatches. Veterans who had gone through hell cursed this boy who decided to run them to death before even meeting the enemy. But Scipio knew. Speed is the only armor they have. No one in Spain expected a strike. The Carthaginian generals, having scattered their armies across the peninsula, were sure the Romans were sitting in Tarraco licking their wounds. They thought they had weeks, if not months, to gather and finish off the remnants of the Roman presence. Scipio stole that time from them. He turned geography into a weapon. While enemy messengers galloped with reports, Roman legions were already standing at the walls of New Carthage. Look at this city through the eyes of a Roman legionary. It is not just a fortress, it is a vault. New Carthage stood on a peninsula connected to the mainland by a narrow isthmus. On one side, the sea; on the other, a huge lagoon. The walls were high, the garrison fed and confident. The city commandant, Mago, seeing the Romans, likely laughed. "What is this youngster going to do? He has no siege towers. He has no fleet capable of blocking the port. He simply brought his people to die under our walls." And at first, it seemed Mago was right. Scipio began the assault right from the march. It looked like hysteria. He threw legionaries at the isthmus, in a frontal attack on the highest walls. It was a slaughter. The Carthaginians showered the attackers with a hail of arrows and stones. Ladders broke under the weight of bodies. Romans fell from the walls, choking on screams. Scipio stood under fire, covered by 3 shield-bearers, and sent new waves into the attack. It seemed he had lost his mind. Why kill your soldiers in senseless attempts to climb an impregnable wall? But this was not madness. It was theater. A cruel, bloody spectacle. Scipio needed only one thing: for every defender of the city, every archer, every soldier, to run to the isthmus to repel this decisive assault. He wanted Mago to believe in his victory. He wanted the enemy to look in only one direction. While the battle boiled on the walls, Scipio glanced at the sun and the water in the lagoon. He had a secret worth more than 1,000 swords. Local fishermen in Tarraco had told him that here, at a certain time of day when the wind blows from the north, a strange phenomenon occurs. The water recedes. The lagoon, which seems deep, exposes its bottom, turning into a muddy puddle that can be crossed on foot. Scipio did not explain the physics of tides to the soldiers. He understood mob psychology. The day before, he announced to the troops that Neptune had appeared to him in a dream and promised to personally open the way into the city. Romans are a superstitious people. It is one thing to go into an attack on a commander's order. and quite another to go when the god of the seas himself has hitched his wagon to yours. And so, closer to noon, the wind changed. It blew sharply, strongly, as if on order. The water in the lagoon began to recede rapidly. Where there were waves in the morning, wet pebbles and slime now glistened. The soldiers froze. They saw a miracle. "Neptune is with us!" ran through the ranks. This moment was worth all the victims of the morning assault. 500 select legionaries, whom Scipio held in reserve, rushed into the lagoon. They ran knee-deep in mud, flanking the city from the side where the walls were almost unguarded. The Carthaginians, deafened by the noise of battle on the isthmus, did not even look toward the deep water. They were sure no attack could come from there. The Roman detachment approached the wall, which was lower here, placed ladders, and climbed up. No one met them. The walls were empty. The Romans jumped inside the city and raced to the gates through which Mago was still sending reinforcements to the isthmus. The strike was delivered from within. When Roman swords began hacking at the gate bars and the backs of the defenders, panic flared instantly. It was a collapse. The garrison, which 5 minutes ago felt like victors, suddenly found itself trapped. The gates burst open, and Scipio's main army flooded into the city. It wasn't a battle. It was a cleanup operation. Scipio gave a chilling order: kill everyone encountered until the signal to stop is given.
It was a cold calculation to paralyze resistance with terror.
The streets of New Carthage were covered with bodies. But as soon as resistance was broken, the massacre stopped at the snap of fingers. Scipio did not want to destroy the city. He wanted to appropriate it. By evening, when the smoke cleared, the scale of the victory became obvious. It was a jackpot. Scipio had captured not just a city, he had captured the logistical heart of Carthage. Dozens of warships stood in the port. Thousands of swords, armor, and siege engines prepared for the march on Rome lay in the arsenals. In the treasury were mountains of silver with which the Barcids paid their mercenaries. But the most valuable trophy was not gold. It was people. New Carthage held hostages, children and wives of Iberian chieftains whose loyalty Carthage ensured through them. 300 noble families. Whoever held them held Spain. Hannibal kept them in fear. Scipio got them in his hands.
Mago, surrendering, looked at the young Roman with superstitious fear.
How? How did he know about the water? How did he march through the entire country unnoticed? This youth, whom they had written off, deprived Carthage of a base, money, and reputation in a single day. The old school of war collapsed. Scipio showed that intellect multiplied by audacity is scarier than any brute force. The soldiers looked at their commander no longer as an upstart, but as a demigod. He promised Neptune's help, and Neptune came. He promised wealth, and now every legionary was stuffing his pockets with silver. Scipio's authority skyrocketed. But while the soldiers divided the loot and drank trophy wine, Scipio himself was preparing to make the next move. A move that would surprise the world even more than the assault through the lagoon.
He stood before a crowd of terrified hostages, among whom was a girl of incredible beauty. And a plan had already matured in his head to turn mercy into a weapon of mass destruction. In the ancient world, war had its own very simple and cruel rules. Vae victis, woe to the vanquished. When a city fell, its inhabitants ceased to be people. They became property. Women, trophies for pleasure. Men, cattle for sale. Children, an investment in future slavery. This was the norm. This was the currency with which generals paid their soldiers for risk. And when Scipio's legionaries burst into New Carthage, they expected exactly this: a 3-day festival of violence and looting. Their hands trembled with adrenaline. Their eyes sought prey. They had earned this. But Scipio canceled the festival. Imagine the disappointment of thousands of sweaty, bloodied men suddenly ordered to sheath their swords and not touch civilians. It was a dangerous moment. The army could have mutinied, but the young commander's authority was already so high that they obeyed. Scipio understood what the old generals did not. Violence breeds hatred, and hatred is guerrilla war. He didn't need slaves. He needed allies. And here, amidst the smoking ruins, a scene occurred that became legend. A scene that Renaissance artists would paint for hundreds of years, calling it the continence of Scipio. But let us blow the dust of romance off this story and look at it through the eyes of a cynic. It was not an act of charity. It was a brilliant, cold, and calculated PR move. Soldiers brought a girl to Scipio, a captive. Historians write that she was so beautiful that when she walked, soldiers turned their heads, forgetting the pain in their wounds. She was a precious gem, and by the right of war, this gem belonged to the commander. Scipio was young, 24 years old, full of strength, a victor. Everyone, both Romans and Carthaginians, expected him to take her to his tent.
No one would have judged him. Such is the law of strength. Scipio asked who she was. They told him she was the bride of Eleusius, a chieftain of the Celtiberians, one of the most influential tribes in Spain. At that moment, an invisible switch clicked in Scipio's head. He did not see a woman. He saw a political lever. Instead of exercising his right, he ordered her fiancé to be found. Imagine Eleusius's state. He is summoned to the Roman general. He thinks he is going to his execution, or worse, that he will have to watch the victor amuse himself with his bride. He enters the tent, ready for humiliation, and Scipio returns the girl to him, untouched. "I return your wife to you," says Scipio. "She was as safe with me as in your parents' house. The gold your family brought for ransom, let it be her dowry." Eleusius is stunned. He does not believe his ears. The Roman wolf behaving like a noble father? But then Scipio names the price, a price higher than gold. "I ask only one thing. Be a friend to the Roman people. And if you consider me a good man, know that there are many like me in Rome." Do you understand what he did? In 1 minute, without spilling a drop of blood, he bought the loyalty of an entire nation. Eleusius returned to his people not as a humiliated fugitive, but as a witness to a miracle. He told everyone, "Scipio is not a man. He is a god descended from the heavens. He conquers not by force, but by kindness." This news spread across Spain faster than a forest fire. Rumors are also a weapon. The Carthaginians had taken hostages for decades, demanded tribute, executed the disobedient. They ruled by fear. And suddenly a Roman appears who gifts freedom and gold. Who would you want to fight? Who would you want to die for? Spanish chieftains, yesterday's vassals of Carthage, began defecting en masse to Rome. Indibilis and Mandonius, two of the most powerful petty kings, brought their cavalry units to Scipio. The Carthaginian Empire in Spain began to crumble, not from sword strikes, but from a loss of loyalty. Scipio knocked the ground out from under Hasdrubal's feet. He showed that mercy can be more effective than terror. But it wasn't just a kind heart. It was a paradigm shift. Romans used to fight states.
Scipio began fighting for mines. He turned the war into a competition of brands, Roman friendship versus Carthaginian yoke, and his brand was winning. However, behind all this diplomatic beauty lay iron discipline. Scipio understood, to defeat Hannibal, it is not enough to be a good guy. You have to know how to kill better than he does. In New Carthage, while diplomats spun intrigues, blacksmiths worked around the clock. Scipio went into the city's armories. Thousands of craftsmen worked there. He did not kill them or sell them. He gave them an order. The Roman army had to rearm. It was here in Spain that the Romans first adopted the gladius hispaniensis, the Spanish sword, on a mass scale. Short, broad, with an incredibly sharp point. A butcher's weapon. A weapon for close-quarters scrums, capable of piercing armor and severing limbs with one blow. Scipio was preparing his men for a new war. He looked at the old Roman tactics, those clumsy phalanxes that Hannibal chopped into cabbage, and realized this needed to be thrown onto the trash heap of history. He needed flexibility. He needed speed. He began training his soldiers like no one had trained before him. Instead of mindless drilling, complex maneuvers. He taught centurions to act independently. "Do not wait for my order," he said. "Look at the battlefield. If you see a hole in the enemy's defense, dive into it." He was creating an army of professionals, where every soldier was part of a single, intelligent organism. The winter of the year 209 passed in the ringing of hammers and the shouts of sergeants. Scipio was resmelting Roman ore into new steel. He knew the time for diplomacy would soon end. Hasdrubal Barca, Hannibal's brother, was gathering a huge army to wash away the shame of losing New Carthage. He thirsted for the blood of this Roman upstart. Scipio was waiting for this. He was no longer the frightened boy who survived Cannae. Now he was a predator who had tasted blood and wanted more. He used mercy to weaken the enemy, but for battle, he sharpened his new sword. A storm was brewing on the horizon. The Battle of Becula was to be the first exam for the new Roman war machine, an exam where the only grade was life or death. And Scipio intended to pass it, so that Hannibal, in distant Italy, would feel the earth tremble. The year 208 BC. The sun over Andalusia burns as if it wants to melt armor right onto men. We are near a place called Becula. Look at this hill. It is not just an elevation, it is a natural bastion, atop which sits Hasdrubal Barca, Hannibal's brother. He chose the position perfectly. Steep slopes, a river in the rear, deep ravines on the flanks. He waits. He knows how Romans fight. He has seen it hundreds of times. Romans are straightforward bulldozers. They will form up in 3 lines, blow their trumpets, and crawl up the slope to die under a hail of stones and javelins. Hasdrubal is as sure of this as he is of the sunrise. But that day, the sun did not rise to illuminate another Roman folly. It rose to illuminate a revolution. Scipio stood at the foot of the hill looking up. Any consul of the old school would have ordered an attack head-on. It was a matter of honor, to show the enemy your chest, not your back. But Scipio had long ago sold honor for efficiency. He understood. Attacking the center meant playing the game the enemy invented. He needed to break the rules. For the first time in the history of the Roman army, the legion ceased to be a monolith. It became flexible. Imagine a mechanism that for centuries only worked forward and backward, suddenly starting to move sideways. Scipio did what was considered impossible for heavy infantry. He split the army. The main part, light infantry and velites, rushed the center with a wild scream, distracting attention. They died climbing the scree, taking the main blow.
It was bait. Expensive, bloody bait. Hasdrubal, seeing this, smirked. Predictable, he thought, sending his best units forward to throw the insolent ones off the cliff. He didn't look to the sides, and that was a mistake. While the center bled, Scipio and his deputy Lelius took select cohorts and made a detour. They went along the steepest, most impassable slopes where the Carthaginians hadn't even posted sentries. The Romans clambered over rocks, clinging to bush roots, tearing off fingernails, choking on dust. They dragged shields and swords, cursing the mad commander, but crawled upward. When they emerged onto the plateau from two sides, striking the Carthaginian flanks, the effect was like lightning striking a gunpowder warehouse. Hasdrubal's army, caught in pincers, panicked. The Romans, who had always been the anvil, suddenly became the hammer. They struck in coordination, brutally, driving the enemy into the center. This was no longer a wall-on-wall brawl. It was tactical art. Maniples turned, changed formation, closed gaps. Scipio conducted the battle like an orchestra. But Hasdrubal was a Barca. The same icy blood flowed in his veins as in Hannibal's. He instantly assessed the situation. The battle is lost. His position is breached. But war is not a battle. War is resources. Hasdrubal looked at his dying soldiers, at the Roman swords already hacking his guard, and made a decision the cynicism of which makes blood run cold. He abandoned them. He did not save the army.
He sacrificed the infantry like a pawn to save the queen. While the Romans reveled in the slaughter, finishing off the encircled, Hasdrubal gathered the elephants, the treasury, and the light cavalry, and slipped away through the northern trails. He ran not in fear. He ran with a purpose. He was defeated tactically, but strategically he saved the most important things: money and elephants. And now his path lay not south to Africa, but north, to the Pyrenees, to the Alps, to Italy. When the smoke cleared, Scipio stood on the hilltop among thousands of corpses and trophies. Soldiers shouted, "Imperator!" saluting him with bloodied swords. It was a brilliant victory. Rome showed for the first time it could maneuver. But Scipio's face was grim. He looked north, to where dust rose from Hasdrubal's departing column. He understood what the cheering soldiers did not. He won the battle, but perhaps lost the war. He had let the genie out of the bottle. Hasdrubal is going to Italy. To his brother. Imagine the horror. One Hannibal brought Rome to its knees, destroying a generation of men. What will two Hannibals do? Two geniuses of war, two armies united by a single hatred and the endless gold of the Barcids. It was a nightmare becoming reality. Scipio stood on the mountain of corpses at Becula and felt not the taste of triumph, but the taste of ash. He couldn't stop him. The beast had broken out of the cage and was now running toward Rome's throat. In the camp, merriment reigned. They divided loot, slave girls, and wine, while in the commander's tent, a light burned. Scipio was writing a report to the Senate. He couldn't write the truth. "I defeated the enemy, but let him leave to kill you." He had to present it as a victory. But he knew. The clock had started ticking faster. Now the fate of the Republic depended not on Scipio. It depended on whether Rome could prepare for a blow that would be twice as terrible as Cannae. Hasdrubal crossed the Pyrenees. He followed his brother's tracks, but moved faster, angrier, and with the experience of defeat behind him. Meanwhile, in Rome, a messenger was intercepted. A strange man with a foreign accent trying to slip through all of Italy with a letter sewn into the lining of his cloak. This letter was intended neither for senators nor spies. It was addressed to Hannibal. And when Consul Gaius Claudius Nero broke the seal and read the contents, his face turned gray. There were no threats. There was a map and a meeting date. Two brothers agreed to link up in Umbria to wipe Rome off the face of the earth once and for all. The Hydra had grown a second head, and this head was already opening its maw. This small scroll of parchment weighed no more than a sparrow, but when Consul Gaius Claudius Nero held it, he felt the weight of the tombstone of all Roman civilization. Hasdrubal's letter to his brother. It contained the route map and the meeting point in Umbria. It was not a battle plan.
It was a death sentence for the Republic.
The math of war was monstrously simple. In southern Italy stands Hannibal, an invincible demon who has led Romans by the nose for years. In the north, descending from the Alps, comes his brother Hasdrubal with a new army, elephants, and a thirst for vengeance. Separately, Rome could still hold them back while bleeding out, but if these two forces unite, they will form a hammer so heavy it will crack the eternal city like a rotten walnut. Nero looked at his officers. He was a tough, bilious man whom no one liked, but whom everyone feared. He knew what he had to do, and he knew that under Roman law, the penalty for this was death. A consul is forbidden to leave his province without the Senate's order. To lead an army away from Hannibal is high treason. It is a tribunal. But Nero was a gambler who understood. Winners write the rules, and epitaphs are written for losers. He committed a mad act. At night, in total silence, he separated 7,000 of his best soldiers from his army, the elite, those who could run for days and immediately enter battle. He ordered the rest to burn more fires and make enough noise for 3, so Hannibal would think the full army still stood before him. It was a bluff of planetary scale. If Hannibal had guessed that only a thin curtain stood before him, he would have crushed the Roman camp in an hour and marched on Rome via an open road. But Hannibal did not guess, and Nero was already flying north. It was not a march, it was a race against death. 7,000 men ran along Italian roads, wearing their feet down to blood. Locals came out of villages, not believing their eyes. They saw not orderly legions, but a pack of wolves possessed by a single goal. People brought out water and bread right onto the road. Soldiers grabbed food on the run, not stopping for a minute.
"Faster! Forward!" "Everything is decided there," rasped Nero, driving the horses.
They covered a distance that usually took a week in a few days. In the north, the other consul, Livius Salinator, waited for Hasdrubal with horror. His forces were insufficient. And then, deep in the night, Nero's men entered Livius's camp like ghosts. Quietly. No torches. So Carthaginian spies wouldn't notice anything, Nero ordered his soldiers not to pitch new tents. They bunked with comrades, 2 to a cot, 2 under one cloak. From the outside, the camp looked the same, but inside it was loaded with a double charge of gunpowder. In the morning, Hasdrubal led his army onto the field, ready to crush Livius. He was sure of victory. But then the wind brought a sound to him, a sound that made the experienced commander go cold inside. A trumpet sang the attack signal once, and then a second time. 2 trumpets, 2 consuls. Hasdrubal froze. His eyes darted along the Roman line. He sought confirmation, and he saw it. Old shields covered in the rust of southern winds, horses exhausted by a mad march. And the smell. The specific smell of sweat and dust found only on men who have marched hundreds of miles. He understood everything. He had been deceived. Hannibal had been bypassed. Before him was not one army, but two. Rome had gone all in. Hasdrubal tried to retreat, but the gods turned away from Carthage that day. The Metaurus River, usually calm, had swollen from rains, turning into a churning torrent. The fords vanished. The guides betrayed him and fled. Hasdrubal's army was trapped between Roman steel and deep water. The slaughter at the Metaurus began. It was not a chess match, as Hannibal liked. It was a street fight in a dead end. Elephants, maddened by noise and wounds, trampled their own soldiers. The Spanish infantry fought with the desperation of the doomed. Gaius Claudius Nero, the man who broke the law for this moment, delivered the decisive blow. Breaking formation, he led his cohorts through the rear of his own army and struck the Carthaginian flank. It was checkmate. Hasdrubal Barca realized it was the end. He saw his army dying. He saw his father's and brother's dream collapsing. He had a choice: surrender and become an ornament in a Roman triumph, or die as a warrior. He spurred his horse and charged into the thick of the Roman infantry. He was not seeking salvation. He was seeking death. And he found it on the points of a dozen gladii. The battle ended. The water in the Metaurus turned red. 50,000 Carthaginians lay in the mud. But for Nero, that wasn't all. He needed a final chord. A cruel, barbaric gesture intended to break the will of the scariest man on earth. Legionaries found Hasdrubal's body. Nero ordered his head cut off. The Roman army did not stay to celebrate. Nero turned back the same night. Another mad march south. 6 days of travel back, with the trophy rotting in the heat, wrapped in coarse cloth. They returned to their camp opposite Hannibal's positions as quietly as they had left. Hannibal was still waiting for news from his brother. He peered at the horizon, hoping to see smoke from the fires of an approaching savior army. And he waited long enough. Roman horsemen rode out to the Carthaginian forward posts. They did not attack. They simply threw something heavy, dark, and round across the ditch, right at the sentry's feet. The object fell into the dust with a dull thud and rolled, leaving a trail of dried blood and flies. The Carthaginians picked it up. The cry of horror that escaped them was heard even in the Roman camp. They brought this terrible gift to Hannibal. He was sitting in his tent when they placed his brother's head before him. Hasdrubal's face was distorted by a death grimace, eyes glazed, but the Barcid features were unmistakably recognizable. The great commander, the man who made Rome tremble, looked at the severed head of the one he loved most in the world. In that moment, something inside him died. There were no tears, no curses. Hannibal slowly looked up and quietly spoke words that became Carthage's epitaph. "Now I see the fate of my homeland." He realized he had lost. Not on the battlefield, but in global strategy. Rome proved capable of sacrifices Carthage was not capable of. The Romans killed his hope, throwing it at his feet in the form of rotting flesh. The war in Italy was over, but Scipio's war was just beginning. While Hannibal mourned his brother, a fleet was gathering in the west to carry the fire to where it was least expected, to the shores of Africa. Scipio was preparing his masterpiece, which was to outshine even Cannae. The year 206 BC. Spain, the plain near the city of Ilipa. Here, Scipio intended to pass his final exam for the title of God of War. Standing against him were the last forces of Carthage on the peninsula, the army of Hasdrubal Gisco and Mago. 70,000 enemies against 45,000 Romans. Again, a minority. Again, a risk. But Scipio wasn't just fighting anymore. He was playing with the opponent's mind. For several days in a row, Scipio led his troops out of camp closer to noon. He formed them always the same way. Roman legions, the elite and heavy steel, in the center. Spanish allies, unreliable and light, on the flanks. The Carthaginians, seeing this, did the same, placed their heavy African infantry in the center to meet the Romans face to face. It became routine, habit. Scipio trained the enemy generals like Pavlov's dogs. He taught them to believe in the immutability of the world picture. And then came the morning of the decisive battle. Scipio roused his men while it was still dark. He ordered everyone to eat a hearty breakfast. Remember this detail. Porridge in a soldier's stomach is sometimes more important than a sword in his hand. At dawn, while fog still clung to the ground, the Romans took the field. But now, everything was reversed. The weak Spaniards stood in the center, and on the flanks, armor gleaming, lined up the best Roman cohorts. The Carthaginians, awakened by the shouts of sentries, jumped out of their tents in panic. Without breakfast, not having wiped their eyes, they formed up in the usual order, elite in the center. They thought their powerful center would crush the Roman middle. They didn't have time to realize the map had been flipped. Scipio began the approach. And then he did what historians would call the reverse Cannae. His weak Spanish center walked slowly, deliberately slowly. It refused to engage. But the flanks, where the Roman veterans stood, surged forward with furious speed. The army curved into a reverse horseshoe. The Carthaginian elite in the center found themselves in an idiotic position. They stood and watched as their enemy did not come within spear-throwing distance. They couldn't attack without breaking formation. Meanwhile, a nightmare was unfolding on their flanks. Roman heavyweights smashed into the weak wings of the Carthaginian army and began grinding them down. It was a meat grinder. Hungry, tired Carthaginians fell under the blows of fed and angry Romans. The flanks collapsed. The enemy army was encircled and destroyed. It was a masterpiece. Scipio used Hannibal's methods against his own people, but perfected them. Ilipa became the grave of Carthaginian rule in Spain. The peninsula was cleansed. Silver mines, ports, people, everything now belonged to Rome. Scipio returned to Italy not just a victor, he returned a superstar. The crowd idolized him. Women threw flowers under his horse's hooves. But in the Senate, he was met not with smiles, but with icy stares. The old wolves, like Fabius Maximus, looked at this 30-year-old genius with undisguised horror. They didn't fear Hannibal. They feared Scipio. He was too young, too popular, too talented. He behaved not like a servant of the Republic, but like a Hellenistic king. He wore a Greek cloak. He spoke of his conversations with gods. "If we give him even more power," whispered the senators, "he will become a tyrant. He will destroy freedom." Envy is the strongest emotion in politics. When Scipio demanded an army for a landing in Africa, the Senate reared up. "Why do you need Africa?" shouted old Fabius, banging his stick on the Curia floor. "Hannibal is here, in Italy. He is still trampling our land. Your duty is to defend Rome here, not seek glory across the sea." But Scipio looked at them with the disdain of a surgeon explaining the need for amputation to a patient. "Hannibal will not leave Italy as long as his home is safe," he replied. "To kill the beast, you must burn its lair. I will bring the fire of war to their land. Let Carthaginian mothers weep, just as ours wept." The Senate couldn't refuse the hero directly. It would cause a riot among the rabble. So they devised a sophisticated humiliation. They gave him permission to sail to Africa, but they didn't give him an army. "You want to fight?" they said. "Fight. But we won't give you legions. Gather volunteers if you can." It was a mockery. They were sending him to the slaughter without resources. But Scipio expected this. He went to Sicily, to where the ghosts of Cannae were rotting alive. Remember those soldiers who survived that terrible day in year 12? The 5th and 6th legions. The state declared them cowards. They were exiled to Sicily without the right to return to Italy, without the right to a family, without pay. For 10 years they lived like lepers, cursed by everyone. These were broken men, dreaming of death to wash away the shame. Scipio came to them not as a judge, but as a messiah. He lined up these thousands of sullen, gray-haired veterans and told them, "Rome has forgotten you, but I remember. You are not cowards. You are victims of incompetent commanders. You are the only ones who saw Hannibal's face and survived. You know the enemy better than anyone. I give you a chance, not for forgiveness, for revenge. Come with me to Africa, and we will finish what started at Cannae." The old men's eyes lit up. He gave them a meaning to life. From these dregs, Scipio forged the most terrifying army the world had ever seen. An army with nothing to lose but its shame. In the year 204, this fleet of ghosts landed on the shores of Africa. Carthage shuddered. War had come to their home. Locals who were used to hearing about victories somewhere far away suddenly saw Roman eagles on their fields. But Scipio did not rush into a pitched battle. He turned on the monster again. He found out where the camps of the Numidian king Syphax and the Carthaginians were located. They lived in huts of reed and straw, careless, confident in their numerical superiority. Scipio sent his men there at night, not to fight, to burn. It wasn't a battle. It was an inferno. The Romans set fire to the camps from 4 sides. Sleeping men woke up in fire. They ran out of burning huts, blind from smoke, and ran straight onto the swords of legionaries waiting for them in the dark at the exits. No honor, no formation, just methodical murder of people burning alive. The screams of 40,000 burning soldiers and the neighing of horses spread through the African night like a howl from the underworld. By morning, 2 huge enemy armies no longer existed. They had turned to ash. Scipio destroyed the main defense forces of Carthage in one night, losing at most a couple of hundred men. It was an act of absolute terror. News of this horror flew to Carthage faster than the wind. The Senate of Carthage, those same rich men who counted money, fell into hysterics. A Roman stands at their gates. He burns their cities. He kills their people by the thousands. They had only one card left. One joker. Messengers raced to Italy. To Croton, where an aging, cornered lion still snapped at Roman attacks. Hannibal received the order. A scroll with the council's seal. "Return. Save us." Hannibal read it and, they say, gnashed his teeth so hard the sound was heard outside the tent. He hadn't lost a single major battle in Italy in 15 years. He held Rome by the throat. And now they were forcing him to unclench his fingers. Scipio's strategy worked. He didn't defeat Hannibal in Italy. He smoked him out of there by setting fire to his own house. On a grey, rainy morning, Hannibal's ships cast off from the coast of Italy. He looked at the receding land he had almost conquered and wept. Not tears, but bile. He knew he was sailing to meet his fate. There, in the sands of Zama, where the two greatest minds of the era were finally to meet face to decide who would own the world. The dragon was returning to his lair, but a knight who had turned into a dragon himself was already waiting for him there. The year 202 BC, October, desert south of Carthage, a place called Zama. A dry, electric silence hangs in the air, making temples ache. Two huge armies stand opposite each other, waiting for the signal to turn these sands into red mud. But before blood is spilled, history gives us a scene that seems like a screenwriter's invention. But it is real. Two commanders ride out to the center of the field, alone, without guards. On one side, Hannibal Barca. He is 45. He is old, his face burned by the sun of a 15-year war, one eye missing, body covered in scars. He is a tired lion who knows everything about war. On the other side, Publius Cornelius Scipio. He is 33. He shines with youth, success, and that special arrogance found only in people who have never known true collapse. Student and teacher. What did they talk about? Livy writes us beautiful speeches, but let's be realists. Hannibal offered peace. He understood that fortune is a whore who kisses you today and spits in your face tomorrow. Do not tempt fate, boy, his single eye said. Remember Cannae. I was where you are now. Victory is ghostly. But Scipio looked at him without fear. He didn't come for peace. He came to become the new Hannibal. You are late with lessons, old man. Prepare for battle, he replied. They rode apart, and hell began. Hannibal had a trump card that was supposed to smear the Romans in the first 5 minutes. 80 war elephants, a living avalanche of meat and bone, more than ever before. By Hannibal's design, these tanks were to crush the Roman formation, turn the legions into a panicking crowd, and then the African infantry would simply finish off the survivors. Trumpets roared, and the earth shook. 80 giants threw themselves at the Roman lines. You stand in the first row of Hastati. A grey mountain roaring with rage rushes at you. Instinct screams, "Run!" But Scipio had prepared you for this moment for months. The Roman formation did not waver. It dissolved. Scipio invented something that cancelled out Hannibal's entire calculation. He built the maniples not in a checkerboard pattern as usual, but in columns, leaving wide, empty corridors between them, masked by light infantry. At the moment of the attack, the velites scattered, and straight roads through the formation opened up before the elephants. An elephant is a smart animal. It won't crash into a wall of spears if it sees a free path. The living tanks rushed through these corridors like water through a sieve, hitting no one. And those who hesitated were met by Roman trumpeters. Thousands of trumpets roared simultaneously right into the animals' ears. Maddened by noise and pain, the elephants turned around and began trampling their own flanks of Carthaginian cavalry. Hannibal's weapon struck back at him. Scipio smiled. Round 1 was his. But the battle was just beginning. 2 infantry masses collided with a dull sound, like a hammer striking wet clay. It wasn't a tactical game. It was a fight between 2 pit bulls in a pit. Hannibal's veterans, who had marched through Italy with him, knew there was nowhere to retreat. Behind their backs was Carthage. They fought silently, brutally, to the death. The Romans, led by a thirst for revenge for Cannae, pressed with shields, working short swords like sewing needles. For hours, the scales wavered. Scipio threw in his reserves. Hannibal responded with the same. The ground became slippery with blood. Men fell from exhaustion and were immediately trampled. It seemed a draw was inevitable. It seemed Hannibal's genius would find a way out. But Scipio had one last surprise. He stole not only tactics from Hannibal, he stole his friends. Remember the Numidian cavalry? Those same best horsemen in the world who ensured Hannibal's victory at Cannae? Now they fought for Rome. King Massinissa, whom Scipio lured to his side, partly thanks to the story with the returned wife and diplomacy, led the cavalry off the battlefield at the start of the engagement, pursuing fleeing Carthaginian horsemen. Hannibal hoped they wouldn't return, that they would get carried away with looting. But they returned. At the most critical moment, when the Roman infantry was already beginning to sway under the blows of Hannibal's veterans, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. The earth shook again, but now from the beat of hooves. Massinissa and the Roman commander Lelius struck the rear of the Carthaginian army. The circle closed. History made a full turn. Scipio did to Hannibal exactly what Hannibal had done to the Romans at Cannae 14 years ago. Encirclement, crush, slaughter. 20,000 Carthaginians were killed on the spot. The great army ceased to exist. Hannibal, seeing the death of his creation, turned his horse and fled. He, who swore never to be friends with Rome, survived to see his city fall to its knees. Carthage capitulated. The peace terms were not just cruel, they were castration. Carthage lost its fleet, lost the right to wage war without Rome's permission, and paid a monstrous indemnity. The great trading empire turned into a toothless vassal. Scipio did not destroy the city. His descendants would do that 50 years later. He did something scarier. He left Carthage to live in humiliation. Scipio returned to Rome a triumphator. He received the nickname Africanus. The crowd carried him in their arms. It would seem, here it is, the happy ending. Good defeated evil. The Republic is saved. The hero is on a pedestal. But this is not a fairy tale. This is life, and it has a grim sense of humor. Having defeated the dragon, Rome began to grow scales itself. Vast riches pouring into the city corrupted society. Slaves, driven in by the thousands, deprived simple peasants of work. The gap between rich and poor became insurmountable. That very good old Rome of stern patriots died there on the battlefields. An empire was being born. A greedy, cruel, insatiable machine that would devour nations for the next half-millennium. And what of Scipio, the hero who saved the fatherland? Rome does not forgive greatness. Senators, envious of his fame, began hounding him with lawsuits and accusations of corruption. The one who gave them peace was accused of stealing petty change.
Proud Scipio, unable to bear the baseness of his fellow citizens, went into voluntary exile. He died far from the city he saved, ordering bitter words to be carved on his tomb. Ungrateful fatherland, you shall not even have my bones. Hannibal also died in exile, taking poison to avoid falling into the hands of Roman bloodhounds. Two geniuses, two of the greatest minds of their time, died alone, betrayed by their own people. And now, looking at the ruins of Carthage and the grandeur of the Colosseum, ask yourself one question. A question that should torment anyone studying the history of success. We admire Scipio. We applaud his adaptation, his cunning, his ability to become a mirror of the enemy. He won because he cast aside morality and became effective. He became just like Hannibal, only better. But if to destroy a monster you yourself must grow fangs, learn to stab in the back, and burn sleeping people, then who really won this war? Rome saved its body, but did it not sell its soul on the bloody sands of Zama? After all, in the end, Hannibal's most diligent student was not Scipio. It was Rome itself. And this student surpassed the teacher in the art of destruction, building his world on the bones of the vanquished. And winners, as is known, are not judged. They are simply feared.